In this series, I'll guide you through creating a simple notes application using React and PouchDB. The app won't rely on any external platforms or APIs for storing data, and will simply save everything locally in the browser. So let's get started. So first we'll install Create React app, and what that will do is it'll handle all the fiddly setup required to get started with React and all the supporting tools like Babel and Webpack. It'll by default install React, React DOM, and all the dependencies that it needs. And with that installed, we can run it. And it will install everything required to make a default React application. This can take a little while to install, but once it does, we'll be well on our way. So once Create React app has finished setting up the initial template, we can cd into React Notes. And now we'll install a few packages that we'll need later on. So we can do npm install React Router DOM, PouchDB, and Moment. Great, with all that installed, we can now run npm start and take a look at what Create React app gives us. So our brand new React app simply has a little introductory screen and a note to tell us where to get started editing our application. If we go back to our terminal, we'll see that the app is running in a live debug mode where any changes that occur will automatically get refreshed. So we can leave this running and it'll maintain itself in the background. So we can open up a new terminal window and go into React Notes. And I'll open up my code editor. In this case, I'm using Visual Studio Code. And we can take a look at what Create React app has given us as a basic template framework for our application. We have the standard package JSON with React and React DOM and the other packages that we just installed. And it gives us a public folder, which importantly has the index HTML file that backs up our app. And right away, we can change the title from React app to React Notes. Back in our web browser, we'll see that the title is automatically changed to React Notes. Now in our HTML file, there's an empty div called root, and this is where React will be placing the HTML code that it generates. We can find out how by going to index.js, which is our sort of root entry point in our application, and taking a look at react.dom.render. This will take the root component of our app and render it out to HTML and insert it into this element with the ID of root. And if we take a look at our app component, this is the current meat of the project. It has our welcome to React title and a little description to say where to get started. So if you're not familiar with React, it's a library that allows you to build user interfaces out of small components which build upon each other. It has a base class called component, and inside of that there is one required function which we need to implement called render, and that function needs to return what's known as JSX, which is basically HTML inlined into JavaScript. Now that's a gross simplification. The HTML that you see here actually gets converted into pure JavaScript via the Babel compiler that it runs in the background. So we can write HTML here and we can embed our own custom components into this HTML where it'll generate the full HTML tree and insert it into your web browser at runtime. So since you can define your own components, which turn into custom tags, it allows you great flexibility to create very rich and complex interfaces that are composed out of smaller pieces and smaller components. So React itself comes with some default components which map directly to their HTML equivalents. So div, headers, paragraph tags. Now inside of each tag, we insert properties, which React refers to as props. And these can be strings, or they can be JavaScript variables, such as this logo, which we imported up here from an SVG. There's a couple of things to take note of. Since this code directly compiles into JavaScript, there's a few properties that you need to refer to in a slightly different way. So instead of a class, you need to call class name because class value is an actual reserved word in JavaScript, so it would otherwise fail to compile. There's a few other things that are relevant to forms, which we might get into later on. So for now, we can delete basically everything in this file. And for our application, we'll be using this app as a sort of container that'll wrap the entire application and provide the app itself with data. So we'll start by defining the initial state of our application, which will be a collection of notes. We'll have an ID field, a title, a body, and an updated @ field. This will create the basis of all of our notes going forward for the entire series. Now I've created these notes as an object instead of an array because we will want to be able to access them by their ID field, which will be much more easily done by using a key value instead of using an array where the index could change and we would end up with the wrong note by just referencing the index in the array. This is sort of a weird technical detail that will become more clear later on once we introduce our database. Now the next thing we need to do is create a folder for our components. And we'll also create a folder for the pages of the application. If we go back to our example application, you'll see we have several pages here. We have the main index page where we see a list of all the notes that we can look at. We can dive into any notes. So we have a view page. We have an edit page where we can edit our notes. And we also have a page for creating new notes. So back in the editor, we'll create the first page that we'll be using, which will be the index page. Now this will be a React component, but it'll be separate from the smaller components, as this component will handle combining smaller components together into a big page. So we import React from React, and we will export a class called index page, which will extend React component. And inside of here, we'll implement the render function. And for now, we'll just return a simple page that just gives us a title of notes. And that's all we need right now. So going back to app, we can import that component. And we can just implement it here as if it were an HTML element. And going back to our page, our notes title appears right here. Now, to display our notes on the index page, we'll need to pass the notes object into the index page. And we'll be using a custom property for that, which we'll call notes. And we'll grab that data from the state. So now our index page will have access to the notes from this component. And if this notes object ever changes, the index page here will receive those new notes and will re-render and update based on the information that it received. So over in our notes page, we can extract all the notes content from the object and convert it into an array by calling object.values from this .props.notes. This will extract all those values from the object, turning them into an array and returning them to this notes variable. Now, for example, we can just say h2, for instance, and then curly brace. We can grab the first note and extract its title here. And if you go back to our web browser, our note title appears right here as Hello World. Now everything's centered and looks a bit strange, so we'll really quickly go into the CSS and remove everything that React has given us. And we go back. Great, everything's left aligned and looking pretty good. We'll throw in some custom CSS later on. Now this is great if we only ever want to show the title of the first note, But what if we want to show the titles or information about all the notes that we have access to? Well, for that, we'll create a new component, and that will be called a note list. And this too will import React from React. This will just be a single component which has a very specific purpose, that is displaying a list of notes. So we will export a new class. We'll call it a note list. And that will also extend from React component. And inside of this render function, we will return another div. And inside of this div, we will want to include a rendered list of all of our note titles. And the easiest way to do that is to throw in some curly braces. And in here, we can call any other function inside of our class. Which can return JSX code as well as render, but this will only be called internally. So instead of render notes, we will create another const for notes, and that will be, once again, object values of this .props.notes. And now that's returned an array of notes. So with that, we can call notes.map. And this will iterate through every item in the array and return a new array of every iterated item. Which basically means we can go through every note, and inside of that note, we will return a div with a header, and the header will include a note title. Great, so now we have a new array of React components, and we can return this straight away. So when render notes gets called, it'll ask for this list of notes, and it'll return them and insert them here. So now we can go back to our main page. We can remove this code. We'll import note list. And we will add it here. And we can get rid of this. Now if we go back to our browser, well, nothing's changed. It still says hello world. If we go back to our main app, we can add another note. Let's put this ID of 2 with a new title. And we can update the body like so. And with that, if we go back to our browser, as you can see, we see hello world and we see hello world again, which is great. Now we have both of the notes. So any more notes that we add to our object will show up here in our note list.